I'm gonna just welcome everybody to Writers Morning Out. This is a free gathering of writers of all genres, of all levels, sponsored by the North Carolina Writers Network. Um, the North Carolina Writers Network did turn 40 this year, and it is more important than ever, I think, with budget cuts now, that we all do our best to support the North Carolina Writers Network in whatever way that looks like for you. It could be a tax deductible donation. It could also just be becoming a member or renewing your membership. So please consider that. I will put in the chat a link to the North Carolina Writers Network website. But I am thrilled to have Michele Tracy Berger here with us today. I met Michele several years ago through her Chart Your Path to Publication course, and more recently at the North Carolina Writers Network Spring Conference in Asheville. Michele Tracy Berger is the Eric and Jane Nord Family Professor in the Department of Religious Studies and Director of the Baker Nord Institute for the Humanities at Case Western Reserve University. She has a secondary appointment in the Department of English. She is a leading scholar in applying intersectional approaches to studying areas of inequality. She is also an award-winning creative writer, and I am thrilled to have her here with us today to speak about speculative fiction. So welcome, Michele.
Oh, thank you so much, Penny, and thank you for that introduction. And Penny, I'm just thrilled by all that you're doing in the network and the leadership that you're providing. So it's just wonderful. And I have to say,
Thank you.
I was former board president and have been a trustee on the North Carolina Writers Network board. And I would not be here today without them, and they are like one of the greatest assets in the state. So and so I'm really excited. I happen to live in Ohio now, and I'm really excited to be in community with my North Carolina and surrounding peeps. So thank you so much for having me. And I will just say, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to spend some time talking about definitions of speculative fiction in just a moment, but just wanted to kind of provide a little bit of context. And I am a creative writer. I feel like part of my work also as a creativity coach is to remind people that there are fun and accessible ways to be creative. I spent much of my early writing career metaphorically in the basement without community, kind of rewriting parts of a 400,000 word novel. And that's right, you heard right, a 400,000 word novel. Because I was like really clever and I just kept redoing the beginning and I was really unhappy. And luckily I found a literary mentor, Marjorie Hudson, who some of you may know is a wonderful North Carolina writer, and also found the North Carolina Writers Network. So I metaphorically got out of the basement, started submitting my work, and I help emerging writers in particular around getting more of their work in the world. And I'm so excited to talk about speculative fiction. I would say pretty much everything that I write has had kind of an element of speculative work to it, and particularly around psychological horror. And I'll say a little bit more about that. But I think it's really important to first kind of ground us in some terms and definitions. You might be coming with some ideas about speculative fiction, which super excited, and we'll have some time for Q&A. But I wanted to kind of get us kind of grounded. So just kind of thinking about speculative ideas, right, are ideas that they don't operate by the known physical laws of the universe. Now, we're always finding out new things about the universe, right, which is amazing. But speculative fiction really deals with things that we don't think can happen in terms of the way the universe and the way the world works. When we break that down further, we see that there's a lot of categories, and I'll just say a little bit about each. And I want to also tell people, don't worry about taking notes, like let it wash over you, because I'm going to give you an opportunity to, you can put your email in the chat later in our time together. I'll send you my slides and other writerly goodies. So don't feel like you have to copy everything down, because you're going to get a copy of my slides. Plus, of course, you can revisit the recording. So when we break this down a little bit further, we see that speculative fiction has this, I like to think of it as a universe. So we have everything from magic, obviously Lord of the Rings, to paranormal, ghosts, angels, demons, horror, which is it's really its own kind of world within speculative work. Slipstream, which you might see that term, which really kind of plays very intentionally with time and space. Weird westerns. If you've seen Jordan Peele's Nope, that you could classify that as definitely a weird western, because there's aliens involved and time works differently. Then the kind of area of magical realism, experimental work can fall under speculative fiction, alternate history, and then science fiction, what we think of as, aliens, extraterrestrial spaceships. So that's a really broad landscape. I would say historically, it also has functioned as a marketing term. So the further away you get from realism, literary fiction, the closer you're going to kind of occupy this world of speculative fiction. And it's also an umbrella term. So I think it's really important to also just kind of be grounded in how are people talking about it? Because sometimes people collapse all of these things when they say like science fiction, and that's one area within the larger term. The other way we can think about it is like what could be, what's possible, and perhaps what's impossible. The term itself was coined by a very famous science fiction writer, Robert Heinlein, all the way in 1947. So this is really not a new term. We think of it as new, but actually it has its roots in the late 40s, early 50s. And he wanted to differentiate it from, at the time, what was a lot of publishing in kind of pulp. Some people call it the golden years of science fiction, but that was a little bit more, he thought of as more sensationalistic. And he made an argument that speculative fiction and the possibility of thinking beyond what is known really will liberate fiction and kind of liberate our ideas of what fiction can be. So that's kind of the more, I would say, academic influence. And I would say the other thing to keep in mind, some of you might be really interested in writing and already writing short fiction, and some of you may be interested in writing novels. And really the work in terms of this term comes out of short fiction and then kind of moves into novels in terms of its historical range. And then just kind of, again, kind of adding this larger context. So Margaret Atwood picks up this term. I know, like I tell people, well, I won't, I shouldn't go down this rabbit hole, but a lot of my stories deal with spirits and entities that make bargains with people. And I always tell people, like, if such a entity found me and said, okay, you could write like Margaret Atwood, but you got to give up a body part. And so I always ask people, like, what body part would you give up? Of course, we all want to write like ourselves, of course. But anyway, so Margaret Atwood picks up this term along with Harlan Ellison, who's also in the frame. Harlan Ellison, by the 60s, is saying we need to really embrace this term because speculative fiction can it can be used to tell us about social problems. We can use it as authors to reflect back to society the kind of more complicated stories that involve issues of a variety of things: inequality, race and social justice, women's rights. I mean, he thought of it as an area that fiction writers can use to reflect back to, about social change. And we obviously see this in the work of Margaret Atwood, who also popularized the term by the late 70s, early 80s. And if you've seen her work, The Handmaid's Tale, Oryx and Crake, much of her work is speculative. And she kind of really said speculative does not mean a dumbing down of ideas. It actually gives us more range and more possibilities, which I love, because a lot of times you'll find people will make these assumptions about this idea of speculative work. And I would say the boundaries are kind of blurring now. You find kind of literary writers who will use speculative techniques. So I want you to be thinking about this both as, what do you gravitate to as a reader and as a writer, but also understand there's kind of push-pull dynamics related to this term. There's marketing. So certain things you can market as speculative fiction. Other things go under the radar, and you'll see that in a minute, that really are also speculative. So we have a lot of literary writers who are embracing kind of speculative ideas and kind of not always labeling their work speculative, but then you see it in that in their work. So I think there's a lot of really excitement about how to use these ideas across a lot of different writing paths and writing communities. Okay, so I want you to begin to think if you're completely new to speculative work, and I should say I write creative nonfiction, I write poetry, but most of what I write is speculative fiction. Um, if you're new just to the concept, some of you maybe are already writing and reading a lot of speculative fiction, which is great. But if you're new, I want you to begin to think about this as all or something and begin to think of the continuum of work in terms of how you could integrate ideas that are speculative into your work now. And without it looking, because maybe you might say, well, I don't want to write about paranormal. I'm not writing about ghosts and I'm writing about the human experience. But, so there's a lot that you can do. I like to think of it as a continuum. So I want to talk about these particular really powerful and popular texts to give you a sense of what are the sliders in terms of how speculative can your work be, right? And kind of give you some examples of that. So if you're not reading Walter Mosley, you must read Walter Mosley. He is one of the greatest living writers today. He writes mystery, literary fiction, science fiction, essays. He does it all, and he's most well known for his Easy Rawlins series of an African American detective. The Devil in a Blue Dress was made a long time ago into a movie, but he's literally one of our greatest writers. So I highly recommend also for someone who engages, I would say, very high conceptual ideas in an accessible way in his prose. So The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray, amazing novel about a 90-year-old. It goes back in time. So we meet this character who's 90 years old. He knows he has dementia. He's living in a really kind of difficult state. He's lost his wife. And one of his younger cousins, a woman who's in her 20s, comes to his aid and helps him sort of deal with, he's sort of a hoarder, he's got a lot of challenges. What is speculative in this novel is that a doctor, pharmaceutical company, comes along and says, if you take this shot that we give you, we will restore your memory. We know that it probably has some adverse effects, but it will restore who you are. And not only it's a beautiful novel because you have this moment throughout the section of the novel, the middle of the novel, where he does, not only is his memory restored, he has this level of consciousness that is sort of an ordinary level of consciousness. And he actually is able to go back in time and piece together some things that he struggles with. It's a beautiful example of one small thing, this, experimental drug that produces an effect. The rest of the novel is not anything at all necessarily fantastical. So moving on, My Monticello, which has gotten a lot of attention, came out maybe 2 years ago by Jocelyn Johnson. The title novella is My Monticello. I mean, there's the whole collection is amazing, but My Monticello, the title story, tells about something post-apocalyptic has happened to the country. You don't really know what that is. That's kind of the speculative thing, that it is definitely something that is unusual that has happened to this group of people. The story is really about a group of multiracial residents in near Monticello who make their way to Monticello and inhabit that. And the surrounding people who are, let's just say, not super friendly and think that the collapse of the US is kind of a good thing and want to assert their rights. So it's this tension between kind of communities and how they see what where we need to go in terms of next phases. But it's also Monticello itself as an estate is sort of haunted. It's haunted by previous descendants, so to speak, not in a like the ghost or Thomas Jefferson is appearing. It's not that kind of story, but that there's a resonance of who occupied Monticello, and then the current people who are occupying it have to navigate that. Again, just a slight sliding into speculative work. Now, the measure, which some of you might know, very different, highly speculative as a novel. All of a sudden, in this society, everyone gets a length of, they get a box delivered to their house, and the length of string, if you decide to open the box, you'll see a length of string, and that determines your life expectancy. The novel is about who opens the box and who doesn't, right? But the speculative element is that everyone gets these boxes and it's presented to them. Highly recommend that. Very commercially accessible in terms of its structure. And then, of course, Colson Whitehead's masterpiece, The Underground Railroad, which, if you haven't read that, highly recommend that. It is actually about the Underground Railroad that functions as a railroad through Georgia and other parts of the US, right? So it's not just, it's conceptual, but it's also an actual like railroad that people get on, which is, of course, very different than for the time period. So it kind of has a little bit of an alternate history, as well as being beautifully told. And then finally, Everfair by Nisi Shaw is an amazing novel. It's an alternate history of what happened to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So there is still Belgian rule set in the 1870s. However, a group of free African Americans who come over to the Congo, free people who kind of got themselves out of the kind of Congo system, negotiate and create kind of a free territory that's right next to what will become the Democratic Republic of Congo. And it's about how these communities really deal with this. And it's a steampunk fantasy. So it's basically if steam and steampunk were reality in that world. So it's got this amazing blend of colonial history, post-colonial history, different communities working together or not. So those are just some examples that I thought might give you a sense of the range of possibility when we're thinking of speculative work, and again, in kind of the novel form, even though many of you might be writing short fiction. And then I want to talk about, for just a moment, Sinners, because I think if you haven't seen Sinners, highly recommend watching it to think both. I mean, both. I think it's an amazing film and just cinematically, but thinking about storytelling. So just by a show of hands, how many people have seen Sinners? Okay, so some people haven't. So highly want to recommend this. It basically is a musical, a horror story, historical fiction, alternate history, and probably something else that I'm forgetting in this moment. It's so cleverly written in that basically two brothers come back to 1930s Mississippi. They want to open up a juke joint, and at the same time, this young man who's pictured with the guitar, Charlie, is this amazing blues musician, and we know the blues was born in Mississippi around that time. And at the same time this is happening, vampires, of Irish descent, which is really interesting, basically come into this community and offer, I won't give away too many spoilers, but offer this community in Mississippi the chance of everlasting life to get out of some of the historical realities of 1930s and being Black or a person of color. It is so smartly told, and Michael B. Jordan plays two roles. He plays twins. And like I said, it's a multi-genre and kind of goes beyond genre, but is definitely in the speculative world. So people are like, well, I don't like horror. They've gone to see, and they're like, oh my goodness, there's Irish jig dancing, and there's a music scene, and like, it's totally blown people away. Ryan Coogler, the director, is the same person who did Black Panther and Wakanda. So also just in terms of storytelling, it's got this beautiful present and past moving back and forth focus. So I wanted to put a plug in for that. I'll just say a few words about my own work to kind of give some examples, and then we'll move on into some writing exercises, and also hearing from you about what you're interested in terms of speculative fiction. So, Doll Seed is a collection that came out last year. It has 15 stories. I tell people it takes them around the whole speculative universe because I've got horror, I've got a little bit of magical realism, a little bit of sci-fi, and a lot of kind of alternate history. So in one of the stories, the title story, Doll Seed, I was really interested in thinking about what happened to those dolls that were used in the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision. So most of us know the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision outlawed legal segregation, and it was based on many of the experiments that Dr. Kenneth Clark and his wife, two African American psychologists, did with what was known as the doll test, right? And the doll study, where they took black dolls and they took white dolls, and they asked black and white children, choose which doll is more attractive or cleaner that you like. And most often, the kids chose the white doll. So I thought, okay, there were these dolls that were used that were important in this psychology experiment. And I thought, well, what happened to those dolls? I mean, sort of like a what if, right? And we're going to talk about like premise and character. And I kind of was able to kind of ground that in an alternate history story that deals with what we know of the 1950s, and we follow Shavella, who is this doll, this spirit that comes into this brown doll body, and we follow her journey along with white dolls throughout the 1950s all the way to the late 60s, early 70s. And part of the story is it is also about hierarchy within the doll community. So dolls and toys, there's a whole kind of fantastical element to the story. So those of you who are interested in kind of retelling, I'm interested in just things that have happened, like because we often think of those like big events as so far away. You can come at it through speculative fiction from a very different perspective. And the themes in the collection deal with freedom and sacrifice, betrayal, otherness, family dynamics. So one of the other stories that is kind of a very different take, very contemporary, is about wishing wells. So that graphic that you see at the bottom, my story is called The Wishing Well Off Fordham Road. And that imagines, well, what if a wishing well appeared? I grew up in the Bronx, in Boogie Down Bronx, among other places. But what if it appeared on a central, main area in the Bronx in the 1990s? And it had a creature in it who could grant wishes. So that's a very, you could take a very classic kind of phenomena, so to speak. So we all know we all have seen wishing wells, and you could place it in a very different, like a contemporary setting or a different kind of setting. So also be thinking about what are the everyday things that we take for granted that could add a speculative element into your work. And then finally, one story, Etta, Zora, and the First Serpent, is set in the late 1920s. And basically, I take Zora Neale Hurston, very famous writer, and place her in context with she's trying to do a ritual that will allow her to speak to a spirit who can give her these great stories because she's trying to be a writer. She also is the first Black woman to get a PhD in anthropology. And so she traveled all over, in real life, she traveled all over the world doing oral history work. And so the story is about this naive young woman who dances at the Cotton Club, who Zora entices and says, come dance, for me, and, I'll pay you, and, I'll get and what could possibly go wrong, of course, right? So you can think about my grandmother and my maternal grandmother danced at the Cotton Club. So I grew up with a lot of stories about the Cotton Club in Harlem at that time in the 1920s and 30s. Okay, so I'd like us to get to, for the rest of our time together, we're going to get to couple of writing exercises and kind of, I think, around these areas of characters, premise, and setting. So I have a wiki page that I'm happy to send people that is a lot more stories than I could send. I didn't want to overwhelm anyone. If you didn't look at the stories, that's no problem at all. But you know, you can give me your email and then I can send you some more materials. But I thought characters, premise, and setting are some of the easiest places for us to play with ideas of speculative work. But before I go there, before we go into our first writing exercise, I just would love people to, and I can't see the chat, but at some point I'll look at the chat down the line. But I'd love for people just to maybe briefly come off, if they'd like to, why are you interested in speculative work, and what are you hoping to explore, just generally? And if it's like, I'm just new here, that's completely fine too. Okay, I
I
see a
find
couple
I
people. Yep.
I find I start with contemporary fiction, but when I want to explore it deeper on rewrites, I usually try for a speculative element.
Excellent. Excellent. Yes. And it kind of adds another layer. Sometimes it's also for us to see how it looks different, adding a speculative element. So great. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Michelle, I love the idea of talking about societal issues and societal goings on through a different angle of speculative fiction. That's what I appreciate about it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it can do a lot of double duty, so to speak, right?
Mhm.
Especially sometimes if you set things in the far future, it kind of is a little bit easier too to say, oh, well, that's so far away, and can people kind of think about things differently.
Mhm.
Anyone else? I can't see everyone who's on the chat, but feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Linda. Not sure if I'm unmuted.
Hi, Linda. I can't see you, but yes, please go ahead.
Yes, sorry, I'm on my phone. I'll try to see if I can
Oh,
figure it out. It's my first
no
time
worries.
joining you guys. But I write speculative techno thrillers mostly.
Ooh.
Also written an alternate history that I'm querying right now. I've just joined North Carolina Writers. I want to become a better writer. I feel like I'm kind of in the honorable mention category for agents, contests, everything. I'm ready to get better.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. Speculative techno thrillers, love it, love it. And I totally relate. I want to just encourage you that honorable mention or almost first prize is so important. When I queried, I was querying for a while. Doll Seed actually won. It took me, I'll say, close to 10 years to get that story published. So sometimes you can be ahead of the curve of the market. But in terms of querying for my short story collection, I was about to clinch a deal, and then the pandemic happened, and a publisher I was going to work with had to, basically had to recalibrate. And I was getting honorable mention or close to first prize for more academic presses that were, that do publishing contests. And then I was able to, I feel like I wrote the query letter of my life when Aunt Loot Books did an open call for short story collection. So I just really want to encourage you and others who feel like, okay, yeah, your writing is getting better, but you're kind of hitting that wall, and you just kind of have to keep believing in the work and keep going. It's just really, really important. So, all right. So I'm going to ask you to do, we're going to do a couple of things together if you're ready to do some writing. And the first exercise, you're going to make a quick list of other people's mothers. So not your mother, but other people's mothers. I'd like you to write a quick list of the first 10 that come to you. So other people's mothers.
And Michelle, I did put in the chat the links to all of your selected readings for today. So if anybody didn't receive those in the newsletter beforehand, those are there in
Great.
the chat for you.
Great. Thank you so much. So yeah, I'm going to give you another, like 2 minutes or so, just the first 10 that come to you. Great. And these are people that you can know well, you may not know at all. In some ways, distance is great. So if you don't have 10, that's okay because you'll be able to go back to this, but you should have some. And we're starting actually with character because I think character is one accessible way for us to, especially for short, and I'm going to encourage people to think about writing short speculative fiction, partly because it's easier to get it published. There's a lot of interest in compressed fiction, flash fiction, so fiction that's 1,000 words or less. Lots of markets will pick that up. Some of the stories that I shared were on some of those markets. So what we're going to do, so everyone's got a list of at least 5 names. Okay, great. So I'd just like you to pick one that you're kind of interested, either because it was like the weird mom, you never understood that person, or you're like, oh, I love this mom. Like, so if you have a strong attraction or kind of like repulsive or problematic, that's great too. So pick one and we're going to work with this person. So we're going to do something, I'm going to kind of get us into a little bit of a writing mode because we've been in our more beta mind, kind of taking in information. So I'd like you to make sure that you are seated comfortably. I'm going to ask in a moment, I'm going to take you through just a brief relaxation exercise, and I'm going to ask you questions that you're going to be thinking about related to this person who is going to become a character for us. So if you don't feel comfortable closing your eyes, that's completely fine. But I'm going to ask you at least to relax your eyes, close your eye, or lower your gaze. If you don't want to close your eyes completely, that's fine. Okay. So, okay, we're in our seat. So I'm going to, for those of us who are closing our eyes, we're going to ask you to close your eyes or just really soften them. And we're going to take a nice breath in through the nose. And we're going to exhale just gently through the mouth. Feeling the weight in our body, feeling the feet perhaps on the floor, body in our chair. And just kind of notice the quality of your breathing. Allow yourself to take another deep breath in. And exhaling out through the nose or the mouth. And I'm going to ask you to just consciously feel like we're going to relax our forehead a little bit. Relaxing through the face. Trying to keep the mind a bit quiet. Feeling the back relax some. Feeling the stomach relax. Feeling that sensation flow into the legs and the feet. And now I'm going to ask you to have that image of the mother that you've chosen in your mind. And I'm going to ask you now to imagine her in a place where you've never seen her. So put her in a place that she would not normally be in your mind's eye. So it could be a supermarket, it could be in a forest, it could be in a car, just some place that you've never seen her in. And we're just inviting our inner writer to play here a little bit. So kind of see her clearly in this new space. You're also in this space with her. So imagine, what are you doing? And what is she doing? We're going to keep asking you questions, and you're just going to hold on to that image of you and this mom. in this space that you haven't been in before. How old are you in the space? And now I want you to zoom up a little bit closer and really look at her. What does she look like? Is she younger than you have previously known her? Is she older? You all are doing beautifully, and just keep kind of that relaxed state for a little while longer. Now I want you to really look past her to your right or to the left. What else is around you in this imagined environment? Look above you and look below you. What do you notice? Feel into, now that you have a full 3D picture, are there any smells, any music? Beautiful, everyone. So now with this image, I just would like you to just gently open your eyes or bring them back into focus and just take a moment and sketch anything that's was important to you from that exercise. So what you saw, who this person was, just take a moment and jot down some notes, please. So there's a lot of different ways to get into character, whether you're creating a character that's speculative or not. I want us to do a couple of exercises where you have a potential character that can be used in something. So I should say this work is from Linda Berry, who's the MacArthur Genius Award-winning illustrator. She's in some amazing books around creativity. And she basically says it's much easier to create from a character from something that is somewhat that you know, but is removed, and then to really embody the visualization of it. So part of what we were doing is you were kind of putting this character in a place, this someone you knew, but making into a character, putting in a place that you didn't know, and then kind of going through the steps of feeling through that. So these are some other, what kind of mood does this mother seem to be? And you can do this with cars. You can do this with any kind of noun in some ways. You can kind of write down 10 cars that you've seen and then, go through this, right? You can do it with places, but it's really easy actually when with like a physical object. I've done this with jewelry. And then that kind of can lead you to some interesting places. I like to do it personally more with characters. So 10 fathers I've known, 10 mothers, that kind of thing. And then, so these are the questions that I was asking you. But just anyone want to share any reflections or something that might have come up? Different way to get into this work? Okay, great. Well, I know you're kind of thinking through the exercise. So what I'd like to do is go to the next exercise. So that's a little bit about building character, and we can kind of come back and talk about some pieces. So some of the pieces that you read are kind of very character in a short way, character focus. Let's sort of think about how do you come up with ideas that are more really connected to the stories that you like to tell. So I'm going to just walk you through this. And I'm going to have you do the first half of this exercise. And then I'll share some ideas about how to flesh it out down the line. So one, I want you to think about your worst day. I hate to take you to a bad place, but I want you to think about your worst day. You wake up, there's something wrong in your house. There's a repair that needs to happen. You're almost out the door. You've spilled coffee on yourself. Your kid perhaps is sick, and then you go to work and your boss is not happy with your work, right? And on top of that, it's either raining or snowing. So I want you to think, when you come home after that day, all those series of things that have happened, what would you like to see? What do you immediately turn on that is comforting or of interest to you? So I want you to just take just a minute or two and just jot down a list of, let's say 5 movies or TV shows that if it was on, it would totally restore your spirits. Right? So for some people, it could be like The Office. For other people, it would be a thriller. So just kind of jot down, it could be a movie, TV show, just jot down 5. So when I do this, I usually teach this kind of workshop. I have an hour and a half, and what I take people through, and I'm gonna show it to you, and then I'm gonna come off screen or come off the share, and we can sort of talk about a couple of different things and questions you may have. So I ask people to generate a robust list of 5 to 10 movies, TV shows. And then the exercise is that you write out just a basic plot structure for a couple of those, right? So if it's a movie, you write out just kind of the log line, right? Or, if it's a TV show, especially like one of your favorite episodes, you could probably come up with a log line pretty easily. And so you have that. And then I usually break people up into, pairs. And then I ask them to look at the following. Because you'll see patterns. If you actually do this exercise, and I should say this is from the amazing Joy Castro. She has for those of you who are kind of interested in very high level literary fiction that has speculative elements and also kind of fairy tales, she has a beautiful collection called How Winter Began, which is a retelling of Demeter and Persephone, but in the contemporary space and centering on Latina women. And it's just an amazing collection. And she's also a wonderful memoirist as well. So you can go through this exercise and say, what is the story that you tell yourself when you need to feel good? It gives you some understanding of kind of your own, like, what are your own baselines? So sometimes people think that speculative fiction is like they have to do world building and they have to know like what Mars looks like, or they have to do all these things. It's like, actually, from a plot perspective and from a premise perspective, it's really thinking about what are the stories you gravitate to. And so you look for patterns, is there a typical structure to the story? What is at stake? And so this is important. Those of you who like thrillers versus rom-coms, what's at stake in those stories for you? Because the more observant you can be about that, the better you can then say, okay, I'm going to think about layering that into my work, right? So if you go back when you have time and go to kind of do the fullness of that exercise and you could do this with a writing buddy, you could do this on your own, you're going to find some interesting patterns. Like, oh, I always, I gravitate to stories where there's real moral ambiguity, right? So I don't like, let's just say, I'm kind of an anti-hero person, right? Or I always gravitate towards stories where there's a happy ending and people overcome adversity. And so what you'll do, I have this choose your own adventure that you would be able to do. You could go to return to that first, you could do a couple of things. You could return to the first piece and think about altering it and in terms of that character you have, putting that character in a different place. You could also think about what you just generated and see, is there a plot that is easily that you can replicate in another context, right? Or a lesson you can replicate in another context. You could take your character and expand that out. One of the examples that is in the list that I sent is a kind of a alternate fairy tale for the prince. You could think about taking one aspect of your life or a character's life that you don't fully understand and tell that as a fairy tale, or obviously write a fairy tale from a different perspective. And you can do that in a compressed form, which is actually quite easy to navigate. I have a bonus episode or a bonus for those of you who are able to send me your email. I'm happy to send not only my slides, but an amazing exercise called the Dream Police, where basically you imagine people coming and they will take your memories, whatever you don't write down, within a 5 or 10 minute timeline. So why don't I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to come off and then we can use the rest of our time to chat some. And I'm going to take a quick look at, I'm going to just also put my email address in. So please, tell me kind of how you're doing, what you're thinking, what's unclear, or what you're hungering for more of in our 10 minutes that we have left. Or questions you have.
Michele, I loved the idea of meditating into a character. I've not done that before, and that is really helpful.
Oh, yay. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a different way. And actually, let me just, I'm such a big fan of Linda Berry, and I actually have her book. It's called What It Is. And it is an amazing book about, she's been an illustrator for, I don't know, 40 years or something, and a comic in terms of what she writes. And she just has such great ideas. She basically says that's the way. I'm a big believer that we have to silence our inner critics. We have to find ways to get past them. And some of her meditative techniques that are very accessible do that. Oh, thank you, Richard. Yeah, so I should also ask, what are you? Oh, I think there was a hand. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Yeah, is it me?
Yes.
Okay, but I want to thank you, Michele. It really presented quite a few ideas for me. I'm working on a time travel piece right now, and that was very helpful to me. Actually, it stimulated a problem that I was working on in terms of the methodology of how one transcended time, and just just you presenting unrelated ideas that popped into my head that you stimulated. So I want to thank you for coming in and presenting a very unique way of looking at plot and character. So I always
Oh, yay.
think that.
Oh,
So
thank you
thank you.
so much. Oh, I'm so happy. And I think that's Linda Berry. I mean, I also do some meditative techniques to get into kind of, I try to coax out that inner writer, the writer that gives us permission, that's the magic maker. And sometimes when we do that, we get unrelated stuff, which is really helpful. We think we're doing it for one thing, but then we get it for other things. So I'm so glad. Are you halfway? Are you in a first draft or second draft? Or
I have two. One is a novel that is finished, and it's a little too long. It's 100,000 words, and
uh-huh.
it's the first draft. And another is a YA series that I gave up on about a month ago because I'm too old. And then I realized that I went back to it a few weeks ago, and you presented some interesting ideas for me. So thanks.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yes.
Michele?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom.
Hi.
Hey, Tom.
I just wanted to say thank you. Really got a lot out of what you guided us through, particularly for me, this last part. I feel like I got permission to to speculate. And whereas before I always felt that, well, that, there's some special technique or something I can't understand, but you really made it seem possible. And I greatly appreciate that because I had some ideas that I hadn't dared work on. So now it just seems so much more accessible. So thanks.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad. And I did not get a chance to mention there is a whole area of speculative poetry, and there are awards for speculative poetry. It's a growing area. And I think that there's just a lot of interest in speculative poetry. So, and Tom, I know you're amazing. I've never had a chance to have a class with you, but I've known you through, Chatham County and the other writers communities that you're in. And so, yay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I see people have put some things in the chat, so I'm just going to grab that while people are thinking. And I'm curious what people are reading that they like, or what they've seen that is speculative that they like. I meant to ask that earlier.
I have to say I'm this Julia. I have to say that I never thought of myself as like, I don't write speculative fiction, or I didn't think that. But then when you were talking about it, I'm like, but I like a lot of writers who I hadn't realized, I mean, I love Margaret Atwood, of course, but Station 11 is very speculative.
Absolutely.
As is, I mean, I love Jennifer Egan. So many of her novels are speculative, and I'm like, huh. So, I had not thought of myself as doing anything in that. And this is sort of an interesting way for me to think about it, because I'm like, you like those writers.
And and I will say that's such a great point, Julia, because some things, again, so I would say more in the last decade, more literary writers are building that in, or being okay with being labeled speculative. So that's happening because that's part of, kind of marketing and changing taste. But really, yeah, it's such a big universe, and there's even people talking about doing the Writers Network actually hosted an amazing workshop. I'll try to remember her name in a moment. She did a whole thing on speculative memoir, where the base of memoir is truthful and accurate, but that the areas that might be difficult, or you don't have sort of historical accuracy, you speculate about what happened. And it was a great workshop. So there's a lot more play. I think I'll just own it. I was raised, now everyone's talking about like speculative work and fantastical work and horror. It's having a resurgence, and Afrofuturism, which I didn't even get a chance to talk about. But when I was going, and I almost went for an MFA, but when I was an undergrad in the 90s, it was not cool to write anything speculative, right? Like that, I was studying Toni Morrison and Alice Walker and, Hemingway, and like my writing instructors, many of them were not interested in that kind of work. And I think many of us, who are of an age, experience like what literature is supposed to be. And so now we can say, well, the rules are just just suggestions, right? So I don't know. I had to unlearn several things to become the writer that I am.
Well, I think Toni Morrison in that definition is very much speculative. You've got a ghost in Beloved. You've got in Song of Solomon, I can't think of her name, carrying the bones of her ancestors.
Absolutely, but I mean, Beloved is an amazing ghost story. It's told at an elevated level, but you're absolutely right. But I think now people will claim it that way where that was not so true before.
I wouldn't have thought of it until we were putting these things together, which very much is.
Well, this has been amazing, y'all. I'm so really happy that, I see a comment coming in. I like speculative given that she examined complex social issues in the guise of fiction. Oh yes, absolutely, Linda. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I was just going to say briefly that I come from writing nonfiction, didactic kind of material, and just starting to move into writing some scenes and beginning to do narrative and dialogue. And as I do this, I notice that I bleed in some things that I have an interest in yoga and mysticism and so forth. And just when people find, I like the idea of sort of bringing in little bits of things that are not quite material, dreams that start coming true, puzzles. And to me, this is kind of it's a spectrum of moving into speculative, right? There's just how much do you bring it in? Can I bring my readers along? Are they, if they come in not exactly expecting to be speculative, how gradual shall I make it to bend their expectations a little?
I think that's an excellent point, and something I did not say earlier is that we want to be careful. I mean, like Stephen King can write anything, and people are reading Stephen King or like Nora Roberts. She writes historical stuff. She writes romance. She writes a little bit of suspense. For most of us, is when we're starting out, we want to be careful. So what you're saying, Richard, is really powerful. We want to be careful about violating readers' expectations. So, but with short fiction, it's a little bit, I would say, a little bit more open and porous than actually when people commit to a novel. And that's why the marketing for novels, they really, in that blurb, they really want to tell you, you're going on a time travel adventure, in alternate Italy in the 18th century, right? Because you want to be careful of violating. If a reader's like, I'm not coming for a horror romance, like, I'm coming for the romance, or I'm coming for the horror. And this actually just really, I know we are at time. This is interesting with Colson Whitehead, who is brilliant, we all know. His book, Zone 1, actually, people were confused. It is actually a zombie novel. It's also a deep meditation about the 1980s in New York. So literary people were coming, they were like, why? I don't care about the zombies. And zombie people who are genre fiction fans were like, all of this elevated language, I just want to get to the zombies. And they didn't know how to market that book. And that book actually did not do very well. It's an amazing book, but it's an example, Richard, of what you're saying. So we also need to be careful. We can take more risks, I think, in short fiction, but we have to be careful. Once we write that novel, that's what our agent or editor is going to help us with, so that we don't violate people's expectations. So I believe my time is up.
Michele, thank you so much for this. I think we are all so deeply indebted to your wisdom that you've imparted on us today. And thank you for sharing all these amazing resources with us. I hope you know that even though you're in Ohio, you will always have a home base here in North Carolina with us. And we hope you'll come back to visit us again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And if for some reason you don't hear from me, please email me, because I tried to capture people's stuff in the chat. But if you don't hear from me in a day or two, just shoot me an email and I will be happy to send you materials. And most importantly, keep going on the writing journey, right? Keep going on the writing journey. All right, everyone, have a great Saturday.
Thank you.
Goodbye.